The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
And welcome, wrestling fans, to the Ice Hour. This podcast is aimed at promoting the world of Division III college wrestling and is named for the late Hall of Fame coach Dave Eisenhower. Here we'll talk about topics and news that's relevant to those who compete for the love of the sport in Division III. The Ice Hour is sponsored by My House Sports Gear. Check out their line of wrestling gear and apparel at myhousesportsgear.com. Subscribe using your favorite podcasting app by going to matttalkonline.com/ice. Now up on the Ice Hour, episode 20. Jason Bryan here with you, and we're going to go east, and we're going to understand what it takes to be a wrestling coach, not just for 10 years or 20 years or 30, nearly 50 years is King's College head wrestling coach. Ned McGinley is our guest today. Coach McGinley, first of all, congratulations on your stellar career as a coach, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So let's just cut to the chase. 48 years of college coaching. What was the key to your longevity?
I guess I enjoy it. I love it. In fact, right now, I've noticed some drops in enthusiasm, so that was my reason for leaving. I probably could have easily hung in, but that's not my way.
Yeah, as I'm doing some research on when you started there, and I believe it was 1968 was the first year of the program?
That's right. We started the program here in 1968, a new wrestling program at a time when it was getting a little dodgy in wrestling.
You know, what do you remember about King's College and you know, the approach that it took to start a program back in the late 60s and how you got approached for that job and what made you ultimately take it?
Well, when I was approached for the job, I was 24. Shortly thereafter, I was 25. And I had, this is my hometown, really. I live here even today, 48 years later. And I was raised across the river in Kingston and wrestled there. And so when I was asked at a meeting between a new athletic director, King's College had decided to expand their sports programs, especially by swimming and wrestling. And when they made that decision, they were interviewing a lot of coaches, and I hadn't had the experience except my own wrestling experience in a year with John Reese, who was the Wilkes coach. They asked me if I would take the job, I think because I was a younger man. Most of the people who had applied were a little further along. And so it was a younger man, and it was an all-boys school with about 800 students, and they just built a brand new gymnasium. And that was the impetus to get a wrestling program going. And they did that. And it was, I won't say it was early, but I had 20-some kids at the first practice. So, considering the size of the school, et cetera, that was quite a first practice. Unfortunately, somebody was badly injured that year. They broke their leg at the first practice, but we still continued on.
Well, you mentioned it was an all-male school at the time. Now you see a diverse offering of men's and women's sports. And what was that change like when women started being admitted to King's College?
It was only a couple of years later, and then first they came in smaller groups, but then very shortly it was growing quickly. We still have a majority, 51 to 49 men, but at so many schools now that is an opportunity that people don't have. Some schools being up to 60% female, and that actually gives wrestling an opportunity to grow again in Division III, especially.
When we go back and look at the foundations of the program, when King's College is going to start, and you wrestled at Wilkes, and for those who don't know, that's about a mile and a half away. Those two schools are about that close to one another.
They're more like 150 yards away.
150 yards.
They're that close. Well, the two schools have gotten closer and closer as time has gone on, and now we actually share a bookstore in the middle of the town, in the middle of the city of Wilkesburg. We actually share a bookstore, and that's about a block from their campus and probably only a block from ours. We're probably within, like I said, 150 yards of each other. Yeah, very close.
What were those early conversations like with John Reese, who's, his name is on the John Reese stools at Wilkes. He's kind of an institution. You're going to take the job and be like, Coach, I'm now competing against you.
Well, we worked at the time. Wilkes was Division One, so there was no direct competition. And every once in a while, he'd have somebody coming in. We'd go down the street and either wrestle them, or at times we participated in a scrimmage with them. But we didn't compete until much later on, much later on when they came back to D3 actually. So it wasn't that. But John Reese and I are close. In fact, John Reese's 90th birthday is coming up on April 2nd, and we're having a get together of the Wilkes alumni. And last year we had a big dinner at the end of the year, a big fundraising dinner for Wilkes Athletic Department, and John was honored by the college. So we're still close. We still talk.
Yeah, and when you look back at your career, how much did you go to coach? And your coach, even though you've coached so many hundreds and hundreds of athletes that come to you for advice, how often did you go to your coach for advice, even as your career advanced on in your 30 and 40th years at the program?
Well, I think I with John, especially with John, there were always organizational things. And look, I was one of those guys who was always the coach's practice person. He would demonstrate on me. And in high school, after I got by my sophomore year, I was the guy who they demonstrated on. So I felt like I was deeply involved with both coaches. And John has just always been a good mentor for me. Last time I saw him, we walked a couple of blocks. He's still driving, so we walked a couple of blocks to get his car. I didn't want him to go alone. And so we walked, just the two of us talking one evening. So I still go back to him. I guess that was about 30 days ago, or about, maybe 6 weeks ago.
A couple of things I want to throw out there just to put a time frame on this, and I'm sure the old jokes never get old, pardon the pun, but 1968. Here are some things that happened during 1968. I just want to get maybe a quick recap of what you remember about them. Here's a blast of them. On the political side of things, it was a lot of turmoil around the world. 68 was the launch of the Tet Offensive during the Vietnam War. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Bobby Kennedy was shot. Tommy Smith and John Carlos with the Olympics and the Fist in the Air in Mexico City. These are all huge things in history. What do you remember about that era and that time, and what the landscape of college athletics was as well?
Well, college athletics was kind of pushed aside by all of the pressures of life, of all the things that were going on. And I've always been highly politically interested. So I was aware of all of the things that were going on, very much so. And of course, Vietnam was a great worry then. A couple of years later, my brother Terry, who was 5 years younger than me, dropped out of school his first year, and of course was immediately drafted and ended up in Vietnam as a medic for a year. So, I was extremely aware of what was going on and what were the potentials for what was happening in the world, and how it didn't press on us too much. I mean, let's face it, here in Wilkesboro, a couple of years later, we would have a flood, 1972. So that became a dominant thing in this area as you try to clean up after that. And, but those things that were happening in the world stage were really changing a lot of things. And as far as I'm concerned, many of those things changed for the better afterwards. But it was a very difficult time period. It seemed like it was going to be almost impossible to get through. And here we are, 48 years later. So we got through them.
A couple things on the sports landscape that were interesting when you go back and look at it. Do you remember watching Super Bowl II? Because that was the Packers Chiefs.
Yeah, I do remember it, and I know we watched. I actually missed the first Super Bowl. My wife and a friend of hers insisted we go to this function, and we went there, and we were trying to find a TV the whole day, but we never did succeed. And it was a friend of mine. Mary Ellen's friend was a guy who wrestled with me in high school, and so we were very interested in this, of course, the sporting event. And we never ever did see that. And I don't think there's a good video of it. First Super Bowl. The second one was very good in that. What was the Hammer or something? And he was in the AFL, and he was supposed to, bring everybody to heel. But I think the Packers kind of bounced him around a little bit, if I remember correctly.
I wouldn't remember correctly because it was 11 years before I was born. So, again, there's another old joke for you, Coach.
That's the truth, too. I look at a lot of these things and I have to laugh. I really do have to laugh. Yeah, that's the joy of getting older.
Another thing that's interesting now in hindsight, O.J. Simpson, pardon the pun, runaway Heisman Trophy winner. And now you look back and be like, yeah, I remember watching that guy. And then all of a sudden to see what happens, what's up with the juice now is much different.
Yeah, he was a spectacular football player, no question. I mean, he was breakaway speed and he had power. I mean, he rushed, I think, for 2,000 yards in the NFL at one point. But he was, and he seemed like a guy who deserved to do well. You know, very personable, et cetera. What happened? Nobody knows. These things are tough. They're very difficult.
From an entertainment set, we're going to sit here on 68 for just a little bit longer, Coach, because other things that came out, Otis Redding sitting on the dock of the bay, All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix, Hey Jude by the Beatles, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly, movies, 2001 A Space Odyssey, The Odd Couple, and Planet of the Apes. All of these things were brand new, much like the King's College Wrestling program in 1968.
Yeah, we weren't quite as big, but they were something special, especially Otis Redding. That was a great song. That was a great song. I still remember that song today. I could probably almost sing along with the music. Yeah, I would recognize it right away. Funny thing, I never really saw 2001 A Space Odyssey, and I kept, trying. I probably should go rent that tonight, try to catch up.
I don't know where you can rent a movie anymore, Coach. I live across the street from a video store, actually.
Yeah, I'll probably have to download it from Hulu or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. As we move forward and get back to wrestling a little bit, when you started the program, you said you had 20 guys at the first practice. And what were the institutional goals for starting a wrestling program, and how did those stay consistent over the course of nearly 5 decades there at King's College?
Well, I think the institutional goals I've always said at King's were to recruit kids and students who want to be athletes, and then in the end, you have to graduate them. They have to do well and graduate. It's always been the goal, and I'm sure that's the goal in many other places. And how your retention rate is, et cetera. The pressure is on you, making sure they're good students. And I know we've been successful at that. Kids who actually competed for us, over 90% of them graduated. I just saw today from every kid who's come into the school, it just happened to see that statistic today. Over time, everyone who came in and said they were a wrestling recruit, 76% of those kids have graduated over time. So we've fulfilled our goals. But I think their idea was to get into the sports mix. They really only had basketball. They had a football program that was on its last leg. It would fade away very shortly afterwards. And they had cross country and baseball. Those were the only sports they had. So they wanted to expand into a much bigger group of athletics, and of course, building a swimming pool and building a gym. And that's where I'm sitting right now, in that gym. Those were huge goals, and to populate them with athletes. And it's never been a big thing for them to do super well, as long as they graduate them and everybody feels like they got a good education.
You mentioned that gym. There's a story floating around that when they were building this gym and this wrestling facility, you got kicked out of there several times because you were always trying to get in there and see what they were going to build the wrestling room like.
Absolutely. Without question. They led me out the door many times.
What was your excuse when you got in there?
They didn't exactly kick me, but, well, I just sort of slipped in. There were plenty of doors, and they were always carrying something through one. So I kind of walk up behind them and either help them with that piece of wood or whatever they were carrying in, or just slide in alongside of them. I was pretty good at that. I only weighed about 130 pounds, so I could get by. I was a little slim.
Not that far past your fighting weight, because, in 1963, you were an NAI All-American at Wilkes, and a guy that won that weight class, pretty good guy, people might have heard of, name's Hayeswinkle. What do you remember about that tournament?
Hayeswinkle. I remember he was a hell of a wrestler. I came up the other side of the bracket, actually, and the semis, I wrestled a kid from Bloomsburg who was a pretty tough kid. But just a couple of years ago, there was a phone number at Hayeswinkles were coaching somewhere down south. And I knew him. He was a Greco Olympian for us, and his son was later a D1 wrestler at Oklahoma, I think, Oklahoma State. and also represented us in the Olympics. So it was quite a family, and we had a nice talk. We had a great talk. He remembered who I was, but I wasn't an Olympic champion by any means there. But he was just a great guy and a good guy to talk to.
Yeah, and just to avoid confusion, since there were twin Hayeswinkles, it was Jim. Jim was the weight class, and Sam was an Olympian. 2012 wrestled for Oklahoma. Just so we get our interest, our story straight about which Hayeswinkle was which. But one thing we know about the Hayeswinkles, I'm guessing they never stopped smiling or laughing during that conversation.
They were great. They were just great wrestlers, and they were very classy opponents. I mean, I only remember them being total gentlemen throughout the whole competition. And there were a couple crazy guys running around, but they weren't that. They're very tough guys, and at the same time, very, very, very nice guys. Like, I had no hesitation calling them a couple of years back when I saw his name on an invitation to a tournament. Yeah, good guys. I think they switched weights the next year. His brother was a runner-up, I think. Yeah.
During that time when King starts to, the wrestling program has started, the NCAA is undergoing some changes about Division I. Back then it was, university and college division. Ultimately, King's makes the decision as to be a Division III school. What do you remember about the department's conversations? Like, what do we do here? They're splitting us up. What do we do?
Well, the first thing was we were in D2, and that was really a basketball situation. The basketball team had 5, 6 scholarships, whatever the maximum was. And when we started, we were supposed to get a couple scholarships. And of course, as all the time, whenever it amounts to money, schools start to cut back, and we did cut back. So we were in Division II without scholarships. And we took a couple kids to nationals, but only if they were in the East or whatever. And we had a couple kids almost placed. They'd get to the blood round or something and lose. But it was a tougher situation. And then when we went to the college division, we stayed in the college division for a couple of years, and then they split that into the D2 and D3. And obviously we were a little better in D3, where we were actually competing like we should. But we wrestled a lot of D1 schools until we got into the Mid-Atlantic Conference, which at that time was pretty large, and actually had a couple of D3 schools in it, Hofstra, Temple, Drexel. So there were some good schools in there at that time too, who were D1 schools. But it was still better competition in a D3 setting for us as time went on.
Like many Division III coaches currently, a lot of them have other jobs. Like, you were an educator for a long time, retiring in 1999. What was it like to balance college coaching and teaching at a nearby high school?
Almost unbelievable. You have to have a family that really you can trust in, and that they trust in you. The time consumed was terrible. I had to run right out of school, run over here, have practice, and then stay afterwards and do all the other things. Maybe make a phone call on recruiting, set up a schedule, go to see who else was interested in having a dual meet next year. All those things had to be done on a part-time schedule. But I'm not sure Kings would have started the program if that hadn't happened. And later on, and I made a decision, I probably could have hung around and hoped they go to a full-time coach, but teaching became much more lucrative and with a family. But at the same time, they were nothing but support, and they have been for all these 48 years.
So you were pretty much part-time the entire time, is that right?
Yeah, until 2000, I retired from teaching, and I came over here and worked for the admissions office and wrestling. In fact, that's the decision that's being made right now, whether we'll go D1, and it's all economics. I just went over it with the athletic director just literally an hour ago, and we went over the different ideas and how she has to break it down. Now she's a very good AD, and she just broke it down with me so I'd know how they were making those decisions. And it's a spreadsheet. It says where we're going and how much it's going to cost, and if we get a couple more students out of this, then we can go this way or go the other way. But she has to break that down now for like a 10-year period in order to justify anything. So it wasn't like that when I started. I'll tell you that.
Hey, you talk about the longevity. Who's gonna come in after you, that type of thing, or you talk about something school wide?
Yeah, well, no, this would be for the wrestling program, and it may impact school wide, but we've begun hiring full time coaches in so many of the sports, like women's soccer, women's lacrosse, um, schools like that. I think we have 20 sports now, 21. We're the odd one out, but I'm talking to them about women's wrestling. I think it'd be a great opportunity for young women to learn the disciplines and the strength and the character that you build in wrestling.
We've seen some great coaches retire that have had long tenures. Gary Taylor is finishing up his 39th year at Ryder. He just finished up the D1 championships a couple weeks ago. Just a couple years before you, Steve Eldridge stepped down at the Coast Guard Academy. He was there for over 45 years. And what was some of your best memories of some of these guys that you coached against for decades? Is like who are your favorite guys to coach against, and who are some guys that you were like, man, I really don't want to coach against this guy tonight?
we actually, I always had a very collegial relationship. It's very odd for me not to get along very well with whatever coach I'm against. John Loudon's like down at Wilkes. We were just on the phone this morning, and he's a young man and coming up, and he's done a great job there. And Brian Brunk down at Messiah. There are so many great guys out there. It's really hard to put those into a message. And some of them have been kind enough to put me in a message that they make about who they coached against and how they felt. This is a great sport, especially at this D3 level where we're very collegial. All the coaches get along, whether you're the Wartburg coach or the Augsburg coach, or whether you're down with us in the MAC conference somewhere on the East Coast. It's just been a great coach. I love the young guys. The young guys are doing just fabulous jobs as far as coaching is concerned. And some of the older guys like Steve Eldridge, those years went by. They went by quick. Some guys Kings never felt like they wanted to force me out for any reason with age, et cetera, et cetera. It was never like that here. They were always, it was my decision when it came to stepping down. And a couple other guys, I know older guys have had to step down, or people got sick. Bud Whitehill at Lake Homing, he got sick and he came back for a year more, and then the next year he passed away. So, you go through an awful lot of people. I remember the older guys wondering whether I could handle the job. And now it's those young guys wondering whether I can handle a job too. But it's been always a great relationship, especially at this level.
Earlier I'd asked what the administration's goals were. What were your personal goals coming in? Obviously, graduating wrestlers and putting fine men into society is going to be, tops on anybody's list. But, what was the importance of winning, or was there a focus on, being competitive, a full lineup, numbers? What were your personal goals as a coach of this program?
Well, everything has to start with trying to get a lineup. You want a lineup, you want a decent lineup so you can put them out there, and you want to have a chance for the kids to win, because then they'll perform better. But obviously, the first year I started without even anything like a recruiting class, and we managed to win 2 meets, and we competed. And really, when they're coming into this, I think Ryder was starting their program, TC&J at that time, Trenton State. They were starting. One school that started has failed, Baptist Bible College up here in Clark Summit, not too far from here. But the others obviously have succeeded very well from those early years, and that was important. But no question, I wanted to win. But I had a tendency to think that I was going to be a better coach, or they were going to be better athletes, and I would compete. Over the years we've competed against Princeton, Army. We've taken our licks. We've gone places. A lot of schools that were good wrestling schools have dropped the sport, and some of them are now coming back, which I love. I just think that's great. And it's one of those things. When I started, I really wanted to be super successful. Early in those years, maybe I applied a couple other places, but as time went on, I realized that this was probably a good place for me, a place where I was level and where we could compete hard, and afterward shake hands and leave the gym. And I'd be mad at myself if we lost, but never mad at the kids, because they always gave me all I needed to do. So we're pretty lucky when you think of it, and we've had our successes. Obviously, when you're competing in the national championship finals with an individual, that's a great goal. That's just a wonderful place to be, and so hopefully that's the way it will continue, and I'm very confident it will.
You mentioned wrestling in the championship finals. Your first All-American came in 1988. 2 years later, 1990, you had your first finalist, the same guy, Larry Danko. What do you remember about him coming on campus, and what was it like for you to experience that and say, we've got an All-American that I've coached here, and it's taken 20 years, but what was that feeling like, and what was it about Larry that made him such a phenomenal wrestler?
Yeah, I just spoke to Larry's family yesterday. He just bought another. He runs a gymnasium here that he built from scratch, and he just got a second place on the other side of the river, maybe 8 or 10 miles from here. Larry is a great guy. He was a great athlete. He went to Wilkes, and I don't know what happened, but he dropped out and was going to Luzerne County Community College here locally. And I spotted him running up a mountain. He was a physical fitness nut. I spotted him running up a mountain, pulled over my car, and talked to him, and then called him later. And he came down, and we got him into Kings. And of course, he was absolutely successful for the 3 years he competed here. Just a great guy and a very successful businessman here locally. He's got a wonderful family. His daughter, I don't know whether she's a senior or she just graduated from here at Kings too. So he's got a great family. He's been a super success. And then the Morgans, there's two brothers. I had two Riley brothers that wrestle for me. So when you're competing like that,
Were you talking about the Morgans? Jim Morgan made the finals 2003 along with Mitchell Marks. So you had two in the finals, and then at 2007, David Morgan breaks through. He's your first national champion, and then he wins it again in 2008. As a coach, what does it mean to see one of your kids win a national title? Because it doesn't happen for everybody.
No, it doesn't. And he was a poised. By that time, he had gained huge confidence. The kid from Augsburg who he beat when he was a junior, the first championship, had beaten him the year before in the opening round of nationals, and he battled back to take sixth. And so he was a 3-time All-American. But he was just he vowed, and that was a tough match, and he vowed he'd get back there and be in better shape. And that's exactly what he did. So he beat an Augsburg kid and a Wartburg kid in the finals. So he did all right.
Yeah, with the landscape of Division III wrestling, with those two programs ruling for the last 20 years or so, when you're bringing kids on campus and you're talking about success, what is the measure of success for your program year in, year out?
The measure of success, I think, is to get your kids to have confidence in themselves in all sorts of ways. But the number one way, of course, is to have the composure to win. And sometimes it just isn't there. The last couple of years, we've had kids on the brink, and they haven't quite got to nationals, and that's our step now. The new coach will have to have that for his first big step to break through and get some guys at nationals, and then to move on and have them succeed as All-Americans, and then hopefully we'll get back to the national finals again. That'd be the next step.
Your announcement came in late January that you were going to be stepping down. What went into that decision, and how difficult was it actually to say, you know what, almost 50 years of my life has been consumed by this school and this program? What was that discussion like when you first brought it up to the administrators? Be like, it's now going to be time.
Well, mostly the energy to run a full practice. I don't know the intensity you have to run a practice with high intensity. So the kids are practicing hard for that hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours early in the year. That's about all the time you can take. And so you have to have tremendous intensity. You're not sitting down in a corner or anywhere. You're not telling them what to do. You're walking between them the whole time, etc. That became a chore. And once that becomes a chore, I think you're probably finished. You probably had it. So that would probably be the thing that made me feel all of a sudden I realized it was getting hard to get that 2 hours together to really run a practice with full energy. And the assistants take over, but it isn't the same for you emotionally or mentally.
When you have to go in and you're recruiting kids, and the recruiting angle is different in Division III, there's no scholarships. You're looking at what financial grants and things you can bring on. But when you're sitting there and you're older than the parents by a considerable amount, does that change the recruiting discussion?
Yeah, and that's true. I was older than the parents. Yeah, the parents always seemed the kids, I think, would always look at me and go, "Geez, I really like this guy," or maybe they said they didn't like him. But the most important thing they would think is, "How is this guy going to make me better?" And then you have to show them that, or they have to talk to you would get your kids to come over and talk to them, and hopefully bring them up on an overnight and have them meet the team and what it's all about. What we're about as a program. So yeah, probably in the last couple of years, a lot of my recruiting has come through the academic majors and other things that happen, when you're competing.
What was one thing that was special about being able to draw kids to King's College? I mean, what type of school is it, for those who are unfamiliar, that say this is a draw for the ultra competitive landscape that is Division III wrestling in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Pennsylvania is a great wrestling state, and the local area always had really good athletes who probably didn't make it to the state championship level in most cases. But many of our very successful athletes are local kids too. And we were fourth in the national dual meet championships, and we wrestled Augsburg in the semis, and they beat us. But we were competitive, and I enjoyed the competition. And they said, in fact, Coach walked up to me afterwards. He said, "These are all local kids," and they were. Only one kid had a different area code. So it was a group from northeastern Pennsylvania, and even he was barely over the line. So it was a great opportunity.
What is the best thing about being able to coach kids that are not there on scholarship? They're there because they love the sport of wrestling.
Yeah, well, the best thing there is probably if you only have one or two scholarships, which some Division I programs try to operate with, everybody's equal. So they all know they're there, and that they're all getting what they deserve, but that nobody's getting a lot of extras. And you try, you help them in class, and you get them to the tutors, et cetera, et cetera. But everybody is pretty equal, and they all have the same opportunities, and that's good. There's very little jealousy, and the team works well together.
Now, you coached over 900 dual meets, and there's got to be a couple that still jump out at you. Man, I remember, whether it's for the 60s or the 70s, whatever. What was what was like your favorite dual meet memory earlier in your career? And then we'll maybe get one that's probably from the later in your career. I'm just curious. Probably got stories upon stories. I'm just trying to tap into those.
No, Jim. We used to wrestle Oswego, and at the time they had three kids who had been to nationals last year. One of them was a national runner-up, and we were going up there to wrestle a dual meet. And there were 10 weight classes. It was the old, when the decision was 3, a pin was 6 time. And we went up there, and they won the first 5 matches. We came back and won the last 5, and I believe we got a fall at heavyweight. We actually won the dual meet, and they were a very good team, very, very good wrestling team. I'm sure they considered that a bad loss, and we considered it a heck of a win. Jimmy Howard was the coach. He was a great D3 coach for sure at Oswego State, and a runner-up Division I national champion at one time.
Yeah, and it's speaking of schools in New York, there's Oswego, but then Don Murray's still coaching at Brockport. I mean, yeah, I'm sure your paths have crossed.
He's still there.
Yeah, I mean, give me a Don Murray story. I got to have one.
Don Murray is always. We were at a national tournament, and he's very much a disciplined guy. And we had one kid, and he probably had 6 or 7, but we were at the national tournament up at the Coast Guard Academy, as a matter of fact. And Don was so mad at one of his kids. The kid was just standing in the lobby waiting for him, and he didn't realize that Don had left and said he should find his own way there. So I threw him in the back of the car, and we took him down.
Yeah, because Don's still pretty active in these coaches meetings. You know,
he is really he's the opposite of me. I'm a listener. He's the guy who wants to tell you, you know, what you should be doing, et cetera. He's a good character. I like him. He's got a good sense of humor. We've never been up on the Brockport campus. I was up in Rochester the other day, and his coaches were there, and he's still pretty funny. He's still pretty funny. They all know him. That's for sure.
It seems that Division III lends itself to have a lot of characters coaching. And what are some of the things that you've learned about your colleagues in coaching that could probably only happen in Division III?
Well, you know, you Division III is one of those funny things. You might be going to have a match at home, and you're out there helping to roll the match with the kids, and the team is rolling them out. You're not going to find that too much at the D1 level, I don't think. But and when you travel, sometimes you're in vans, and then you've got all sorts of things. We got a flat tire on a Saturday morning, and it's tough to find a place that doesn't have a lot of people lined up at it when you want to change a tire or you want to get a new tire. Very difficult. So there are great things in D3, but you end up, sometimes if the laundry basket has been moved to the room where the washing machine is, you got to do that. You're not going to look around for anybody else to do it. You're just going to get behind it and push it wherever it needs to be.
When we look at the landscape of Division III wrestling, is it, there's every level is going to have its quirks, and of course we know that Division III is non-scholarship, and right now one of the hot button topics is the realignment. And one of the points that is often brought up is that Kings and Wilkes are, like you said, 150 yards from one another. They're in different regions for qualification. What do you say about that? Now that you're done coaching, you can just go off, right?
Yeah. Well, the real thing is that you want to, you want to have teams like us close together. We compete against each other or in the same gym 3-4 times a year, and it's kind of ridiculous for us to be here. But I think part of that D3 thing is geography and figures in there, and that can be very difficult. If you're driving 4 hours to have a dual meet, you're not a happy guy. You're not a happy guy, and hopefully that's not happening to us too much longer. I think that certainly we're going to make the change. There's all sorts of new schools coming in, and some of them are southern schools. We wrestled in Roanoke last year in our regional, and that was a 5-hour drive for us. So it's a pretty good haul. Yeah. And then 5 hours home after it's over, which is the more difficult haul, I think.
Yeah, and growing up in Virginia, I know that I-81 that time of year can be great or it can be treacherous. So, and then I lived in Pennsylvania, so I know all about it from all the way down to Southwest Virginia, all the way into PA. So I can share your pain there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a difficult ride, but at least it's a straight ride from here. 81 almost, cuts off the corner of Wilkes-Barre, and so we just hop on here, and it's just a forever drive, over 5 hours.
Now, do you still drive the vans, or you let your assistants do that?
I had to do that once this year. I'm not happy about it. one of our assistants ended up going in for military service, and so it was down to just myself and Adam Healy, who's the number one assistant, and Adam had to. I had to be the other driver. It was only over to Lycoming Williamsport, which is about an hour and a half away, and so it wasn't too bad. But still, it was a pain in the neck, to drive those vans.
Yeah, I'm just also curious. So there's got to be strange road trips. I mean, back in the day when there wasn't the internet, then scheduling was more. It was phone calls and letters,
and you didn't know when you were late. I mean, if we were late, you couldn't even get in touch with people because you'd have to go find a payphone if you were lucky. Dump a quarter in it. Like I said, when those cars broke down, we ended up missing most of those dual meets. I think we wrestled one instead of the 3 we were supposed to be at. And then you'd be driving in the snow, and the snow would come down, and the weather reports probably weren't as good. And you would be driving, and all of a sudden realize that you were in 3 or 4 feet of snow, and they'd probably closed the road. No, not good.
There's one coach I do want to get a couple of stories and insight on, and this show is named the Ice Hour in honor of Dave Eisenhower, who was at TCNJ.
He's a great guy.
The Trenton State, as it was known back then. And what are some stories you have about Ice in his heyday at Trenton State / TCNJ?
Well, he was always a character, and the funniest thing, he was a pretty healthy guy. Probably drank too much soda, but other stuff. So I was shocked when he all of a sudden, told me he was ill. And like I said, we were close enough. We would be in touch. We were in the same conference, or the Metropolitan Conference, for a while. We were in the same, any kind of a regional, of course, led us into the same place. One of the last things he did was working for the NCAA. He was he was the representative from the NCAA when we hosted the regional here. But in any case, he came up, and there were some tremendous arguments, I think. And the one coach was so mad at us afterwards. He told us he hated us. He disrespected the two of us because we held to the NCAA line that we would get the seating done through their new system. And we did hold through it. And I was happy we did. It was something we just had to do. But afterwards, Ice was laughing at me. He said, "Can you imagine that? The guy disrespects us?" And I wouldn't mention him now because, once again, we're collegial at this level, and hopefully he's got a little better feeling about the two of us now after 3 or 4 years.
Been talking with Coach Ned McGinley, the now retired coach at Kings. That's King with an apostrophe S, not to be confused with the Division II school in Bristol, Tennessee, which is King. It's Kings with an S. They are the Monarchs. That's something I like. My alma mater is the Monarchs at Old Dominion, so I've always kind of followed what the other Monarchs in wrestling are doing. But Coach McGinley, I appreciate the time and the knowledge. We could probably go on for hours about this, but I just want maybe your final thoughts to try to sum up 48 years of Division III coaching. I mean, how can you sum this up?
Well, the first thing is, as soon as you say Old Dominion, I think Gray Simons. So you know how I sum it up. We used to wrestle at the Wilkes Open every year, and Gray was there, and I would go over to find a place where a guy like Gray Simons would be demonstrating some wrestling holds to his own team or to a bunch of guys standing around. And I think that's really, even to this day, when I was brought into the Hall of Fame here, the National Hall of Fame, but here in the Pennsylvania chapter, Gray Simons was one of the guys, along with John Reese, who was giving me my plaque. And when I think of those things, I know that I made the right choice to do this for all these 48 years. It's been a great opportunity to wrestle against some great schools like Augsburg and Wartburg, and all the things that we've done. So I'm very, very happy. I'm a very happy place.
Show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.